Hi students, and welcome to this first lecture in our Creative Writing, our online class. Today we're going to look at conveying ideas with words. We're going to look at things like voice, tone or mood, imagery, organization, and meaning. And we're going to analyze a couple of poems today and find these things in the poem. Now you might say, well, this is a creative writing course. Why are we analyzing literature? Isn't that for a literature course? Well, the best writers are readers. And in reading and analyzing literature, we can understand techniques that authors have used and become better writers ourselves. We'll begin today looking by I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud by William Wordsworth. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake beneath the trees, fluttering, dancing in the breeze. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched a never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. For oft when on my couch I lie in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude, and then my heart with pleasure fills, and dances with the daffodils. We'll begin by looking at voice. Who is speaking in this piece of literature? And you see it could be I in the first person, it could be we, first person plural, you, the second person, he or she, which are third person singular, or they, third person plural. And the choice about using a specific voice will aid to the meaning of the poem. We see here in I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud that the voice is the first person. In this case, we're getting it from the perspective of the author or the writer. He's telling us exactly what he's experienced. We're seeing it from his point of view. Again, this aids the meaning of the poem, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But every time that you write, you have a choice of whether to write in the first person or the second person, which is a little less common, or, of course, the third person, kind of an objective point of view. And when you do that, you are conveying a certain meaning by using one of those techniques. We're going to look at the tone or the mood of this poem. What is it trying to convey to us? In I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, we see key words in here because word choices reveal a specific tone. We see fluttering, dancing, sprightly dance, sparkling waves in glee, the word gay, bliss, pleasure, dances. All of these are giving this lighthearted or joyful tone. So again, we can understand a tone by looking at specific words. We can also look at literary techniques like personification because those reveal a specific tone. We see that in the first stanza. He sees a crowd, a host of golden daffodils. Well, daffodils aren't a crowd. A crowd is usually associated with people. But he's taken an inanimate object, daffodils, and giving them a lifelikeness to it. This is making the poem very whimsical. Again, in the last line of the first stanza, we see fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Well, daffodils don't dance, but in this kind of technique of personification, it's causing us to get this impression that this poem is very lighthearted and whimsical. Again, in the second stanza, he talks about stars tossing their heads. Well, stars don't have heads and they don't toss their heads. But again, he's bringing this personality to stars, this personification, and again, it's aiding to the tone and the meaning that this is a very lighthearted piece. We see that also with a jocund company, right? So again, by using these techniques, we are displaying and conveying a tone to our reader. The meter choice also reveals a specific tone. Now we'll talk about meter later on as we get into writing poetry. But what a meter is a certain amount of syllables and how the line flows in the stanza. So for example, we look here, I wandered lonely as a cloud. So what we have is we have an iambic meter because it's an unstressed syllable followed by a stressed syllable. I wandered lonely as a cloud. Okay? And that gives this kind of dance to it by using that iambic. So poetry is not just about finding words that rhyme at the end of lines, it's also using certain meters. In this case, it's an iambic meter. But I want you to notice something else. In the second line, he uses a monosyllabic structure. So every word in line 2 is just one syllable that floats on high or vales and hills. And what that does is when it's less complex in its syllable structure, it gives it this kind of impression of just kind of dancing, waltzing. So again, we can set the tone by using word choices, by using literary techniques such as personification, but also give it this lightheartedness by using a certain syllable structure and meter as well. Imagery is important because what we're doing when we write is we're painting a picture with our words. When we're dealing with poetry, imagery is very common, and especially in William Wordsworth's poem and other poems as well. But we see here so many images that are being painted by the author. He wandered lonely as a cloud. When you get this impression, all of a sudden you see this cloud floating in the air by itself that floats on high or vales and hills. So you see him sort of floating above the hillside. And he sees this crowd of golden daffodils. So again, the word golden, a crowd of them, he's automatically painting this picture that's striking us in our mind. Beside the lake, beneath the trees. So we see a lake. We see trees there now, fluttering and dancing in a breeze. Now we see the kind of the breeze blowing through these flowers, and they're moving with the wind. Then the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way. Again, he's painting this image of stars at night. They stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance. So now we understand that there is this bay, this lake that we see, and they're tossing their heads in sprightly dance. And then we're taken to this scene with waves beside them dancing and sparkling with the starlight. So, and then he takes us to this final scene where he's sitting on his couch, where he's lying there in vacant or in pensive mood. So when you write, you are using these images. You're painting pictures with your words. Organization is really important in writing. How do we convey our thoughts? In what ways are we going to organize them? We can make different choices about how we organize our work, whether it's poetry or whether it's short story. And when we organize something, we're helping our reader to see what we're trying to portray. One of the things that he makes a choice here is he's organizing this by scenes. In the first scene, we see daffodils. He's showing us the daffodils, the crowd of daffodils. In the second stanza, he's showing us the stars. In the third stanza, he's showing us the waves. And in the last stanza, he's showing us himself on the couch. So again, you can organize your work by timeline. You can organize it by different aspects. In a kind of a short story, you might see it organized by character, especially in a novel. One chapter might be about one character, one chapter might be about another character, another chapter might be about a third character, and then they kind of intermingle later on in different chapters. So in this way, he is showing us different scenes, starting with the daffodils and the stars, the waves, and then the couch. So this poem is organized by 4 distinct scenes. Organization also helps tie the poem together. We're going to see this in a couple of different ways. One way is simply by the rhyming scheme. So at the last word ties in with certain concepts. But along with that, we see, so like cloud and crowd, and hills, daffodils, we see trees and breeze. So all of those ideas sort of tie those things together. But we also see here he uses the word daffodils. He uses it in the first stanza, and he uses it as the last word. Well, that's a very creative way to bring these concepts together, to tie things together. But there's something else I want to show you. The image of dancing. Notice he uses it in all 4 stanzas. And by doing that, again, he's bringing an organization to this poem. So organization can be done by rhyme. It can also be done by repetition of images or ideas. And lastly, what is the author trying to say? What's the meaning? Every piece of work has a meaning to it. And it may be profound, it may be whimsical, it may be, not very profound, and that's okay. But we want to understand, what is the author trying to say? When you write, you are giving a meaning, and you are showing your meaning. You're telling your meaning in everything you do, from your word choices, from the overarching theme, from your organization. All of it is lending to the meaning. So in this case, the meaning is found really in the last paragraph, right? Where he says, "For oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude." So in the third stanza, he says, "I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought." So he's saying that as he is in nature and seeing these beautiful things, he doesn't realize how profound they are, what wealth they are to him. But the wealth, he's saying, is when he's just lying on his couch, sitting there in vacant or in pensive mood, and he closes his eyes, and then his heart is filled with these images that he's seen in nature. He says, "They flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils." So William Wordsworth is telling us that he gets so much solitude and pleasure and bliss from nature. Okay, so let's look at one other poem, and that's a poem by George Herbert called Prayer. And this George Herbert lived in the 1500s, 1600s, and so you're going to find that a lot of these words are spelled a little differently than what you might be used to. Prayer, the church's banquet, angel's age, God's breath in man returning to his birth, the soul in paraphrase, heart in pilgrimage, the Christian plummet sounding heaven and earth. Engine against the Almighty, sinner's tower, reversed thunder, Christ side piercing spear, the 6 days world transposing in an hour, a kind of tune which all things hear and fear. Softness and peace and joy and love and bliss, exalted manna, gladness of the best, heaven in ordinary, man well dressed, the Milky Way, the bird of paradise, church bells beyond the stars heard, the soul's blood, the land of spices, something understood. So we begin by asking the question, who is speaking here? And we get a third-person point of view. It's not about in the first person. He's not saying I, like we saw in William Wordsworth's poem. It's not second person, but it's third person. He's talking about prayer and sort of talking about it objectively. So in looking at this poem, we're going to look at a number of things. Like, for example, let's look at the word choices and see how the word choices that George Herbert uses aids to understanding the meaning. Well, in this poem, we see a number of things. Like, for example, in the second stanza, we see engine, reversed thunder, sinner's tower, Christ's side piercing spear. These are all very powerful images. But yet in the third stanza, that's juxtaposed with the third stanza here, softness and peace and joy and love and bliss, exalted manna, gladness of the best, man well dressed. Again, these ideas here are very soft and gentle. So the idea of prayer, we're starting to understand the meaning here, that it's both strong and powerful, as well as something that's soft and blissful and joyful and peaceful. So again, word choices help us to convey meanings. The imagery here is really quite extraordinary. We see things like a church's banquet here in the first line. And you can picture a banquet, right? God's breath in man returning to his birth. I mean, that's a stunning image as well. A sinner's tower. There's a picture there that you get. Reversed thunder. And here's a powerful image. Christ's side-piercing spear here in the second stanza. And in the third stanza, exalted manna. So manna was what was provided from heaven, and it's exalted. A man well dressed, the Milky Way, the bird of paradise. These images are just stunning. Church bells, beyond the stars heard. The soul's blood. Souls don't have blood, but yet this is again these stunning images that are being used here, and the certain word choices again are conveying a specific meaning. So how does George Herbert organize his poem? Well, if you think about it, in the first stanza it's a lot of like abstract images. In the second stanza, a lot of powerful images. In the third stanza, a lot of soft and blissful images, a lot of peaceful images. And so he's breaking it up in these kind of different ideas, especially that second and third stanza. They're joined together by the strength of their images or the things that they have in common. But also, in this organization, we can see certain rhyme schemes, right? So here in the first line, age rhymes with pilgrimage, birth and earth rhyme, tower, hour, spear and fear in the second stanza, bliss, best, dressed, so bliss and paradise, and there's sort of like a sort of a rhyme, and then blood and understood. So the rhymes bring together the type of organization. But as we've seen previously, repetition is also used to tie the poem together. So we'll look in our next lecture about how sounds work and how sounds can tie things together. But I want you to see here in the first line, churches is used, and in the second to last line, church is used. So by repeating that the word church, we are getting a he is tying together this poem. And lastly, meaning. What does he mean by all of this? Well, certainly the word choices, the images, the way it's organized, the repeating words help tie together a meaning. But I want you to also see his technique in the words he doesn't choose. If you notice here, this poem lacks something. It lacks verbs. There are no verbs in here. And that's a very deliberate choice by George Herbert. And literary analysts would say the reason why he doesn't use a verb is because whereas we often think of church as a man's action, what he is demonstrating by the lack of verbs is that it's really God's action. So, and we see that reversed thunder, exalted manna, some of these things here tie into that meaning as well. So again, we take everything, we look at the meaning, and all of the things that we see, the word choices that are being used, the images that are being conveyed, the way that it's organized, the way things repeat, it all brings it back to this meaning. So it's not just about, poetry is not just about conveying thoughts, right? Writing is not just about conveying thoughts. It's also in the way that we express them conveys meaning as well. It's like that phrase that you might hear. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. And again, how you say it conveys what you're saying. So your assignment is that you're going to do the same thing. You are going to analyze a couple of pieces of works, a couple of poems in this case, by voice, tone or mood, imagery, organization, and meaning. And the two that you're going to look at are, you probably know this one, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. You've probably looked at that in your English class even. And also The Land of Counterpane by Robert Louis Stevenson. And do the same things that we've done. Look at the voice, who's talking. How is the tone or mood reflected? What images are being conveyed? How are these poems organized? And how does that convey everything to the meaning? Good luck with that, and I hope you do very well. Let me know if you have any questions.